The inner world, where we spend most of our time, most of our lives, until deepening of realization dissolves perceptual filters, seems to divide our experience up into internal and external. So even though we perceive an internal experience and the external world, all of that is really contained within the internal world of thought and thought structure and perception. So all of the rules that we grow accustomed to that seem to govern who we are, how we interact, how we get things done, what's important to us, are governed by this internal world, are governed by the system of thoughts, and are kept in place by a series of perceptual filters that assure that our attention spends most of its time on this internal experience. There was a really good episode on the series Star Trek: The Next Generation called Ship in a Bottle. It might have been 2 episodes, where they used the holodeck to recreate the world of Sherlock Holmes. But one of the characters, the arch nemesis of Sherlock Holmes, Moriarty, became self-aware inside the holodeck and actually tricked some of the show's inhabitants to give him control of the ship outside the holodeck, even though he could not leave the holodeck. In a kind of strange way, this is how the ego actually affects the body and how it interacts with the environment. But more importantly, the way they solved this problem was ingenious. They created a holodeck within the holodeck and trapped Moriarty in there to believe that he was still in control of the ship outside of the holodeck he was in. And that whole thing was playing inside another holodeck. And then they left the holodeck. So Moriarty, in this description, represents the ego. He will stay in that dream of control, that dream that he's somehow engaging in the outside world and in control of it, but he remains completely and absolutely within the internal world. When we begin to wake up from this, we step out of this internal world and we find out that what we thought was the external world isn't anything like the mind imagined it to be. First of all, it's far freer, more vast, more subtle, more indescribable than we could have ever imagined. Also, it feels far more natural, and we instantaneously know that we had been somewhat asleep in a dream of mind identification. And yet we can still see the mechanism of that mind identification happening, playing out, and even catching us from time to time. As we explore further, we find that even the fabric and structure of this external world is nothing like we imagined it to be when we were engaging the internal world, believing it was the external world. It turns out it's not structured in time or space. Now, I know that's a radical statement, but at some point, realization does clarify to this degree. There's no mental model, there's no logical description that satisfies when it comes to describing what it's like to not live in space and time, and yet live a normal life, conventionally speaking. This is wholly beyond description, but there are many pointers, and more importantly, many inquiries to investigate the remaining dualistic filters that prevent seeing this with clarity. Most importantly, one has to learn to trust their instinct about this, to trust that living a life that feels confined, structured by beliefs, limited, heavy, bound by struggle, is not what you're here for. As we turn toward this ever deepening and clarifying instinct, that deep peace, freedom, equanimity is the natural way. The clearer this gets, the lighter things are, the less suffering that can be found.